Alright, what is up everyone? Hope you're all doing well. So I just got new tom heads the other day, which I'm very excited about. It's been way overdue for me to change my heads. This time I opted for Evans UV1, so a UV1 on the 10-inch, on the 14-inch, and a UVE MAD on the 16-inch floor tom. They're sounding great. Obviously, they're already on the kit. They're tuned up and good to go. But I do want to make a video about tuning this time, so tuning toms. Maybe in the future, I'll make a video about tuning snare and bass drum as well. Let me know if you guys would want to see that. But for now, we'll talk just about tuning toms. So without further ado, here's my 10-step guide to tuning great sounding toms. So step one for me is to take both heads off the drum. It doesn't matter if I'm just changing the batter head or just the resonant head or if I'm changing both. I always take both heads off. The reason for this is the way that I tune my drums, I'm very specific about which pitch I tune them to, each of the heads that is. So the other head being on the drum would just kind of get in the way. I'd have to either dampen it by like holding it on my lap or holding a hand against that head or something. It's better to just take both off and start 100% fresh. That will also guarantee you're not like biased or impacted by the way that the head was tuned before as it's already on. You know, it's easy to get a little lazy, like it's already on there, I won't touch it that much. Start from scratch. That will make sure you get the best end result. Step two is shell maintenance, and I think this is something people skip a lot, but it's very important for me to always do this as I'm changing heads. And the main thing in that is actually taking a screwdriver and making sure that all the screws that are holding the lugs on the inside of the drum, make sure that all of those screws are securely fastened. Because one thing that's a nightmare to deal with, if you got a great sounding drum kit, you got it all tuned up and you're good to go maybe for recording or something, and you start playing and you start hearing some rattling on the inside and it turns out one of the screws has come loose. That can happen with time if you don't pay attention to that and just let them slowly, untighten. So that's a big one for me. Make sure all the screws on the inside are nice and secure, but also take a cloth, wipe off any dust and stuff like that from the bearing edges to just make sure that the head sits flat on the bearing edge, no dust or any dirt in between. That will give you the best possible sound. And obviously, while you're at it, make sure to check the drum itself. You want to make sure that there's no cracks or anything in the actual wood. Step three is to put the batter head on, and I always like to start with the batter head. The reason for this you'll find out in just a second. But as I'm putting the head on, obviously, make sure it's nice and flat against the bearing edge, put the hoop on, and what I like to do first is to make sure that I finger tighten all the lugs to give me the best possible, like the optimal starting position to then actually start tuning. And finger tighten is a really loose term. Some people like to think of that as just, adjusting the lugs with your finger or the tension rods with your fingers until they're just barely touching the hoop. And some others, like me, for example, I like to tighten them as hard as I can with just my fingers. It doesn't really matter what your approach or what your opinion of what finger tight should be, as long as you do it all the same across all the tension rods on the drum. That's really all that matters. So that will give you the best possible starting point to make sure that every tuning move you make after that will be nice and equal. Step four is to tune the batter head up to pitch. And here's the reason I start with the batter head. I like to tune my drums usually to a specific interval. I'm not necessarily aiming for a specific note or anything, but once I achieve that note, I want to make sure there's a specific interval between my batter head and my resonant side. Usually that's a minor third for me. That's the tuning I've got on all my drums right now. I like to experiment with this a bit though, but for now I'm using the minor third interval. It just gives me that sound I'm looking for. Either way, start by tuning up the batter head. And the reason for this is a minor third is based off the resonant head being 3 semitones higher than the batter head. So I want to start with the batter head, tune it up until I get to a pitch which sounds good to me. I'm not necessarily aiming for, say, an A flat or something. I'm just tuning the head up until it sounds good. And then step five, once you've got the batter head tuned up to a pitch that on that particular drum sounds right for you, take the palm of your hand, push down pretty firmly on the center of the head just to stretch it out a little bit. And the reason for this is these are, obviously you're dealing with brand new heads. They're gonna take a little time to get adjusted to the drum. So what's gonna happen if you don't do the stretching thing is sometimes you'll notice after doing a bit of playing, you'll notice the head starting to untune a little bit. And the reason for that, again, is the heads are new. They need to be stretched out a little bit. So do that first, palm of your hand, push down. Sometimes you can hear a little bit of cracking and stuff, that's fine. So you just push down on it and just to stretch it out a little bit. And what you might notice is this might mess up the tuning that you did just so slightly. This is also part of the reason why I don't tune my drums super carefully the first time. Like the first time I tune up the batter head in step four, I don't do that super meticulously, like getting it just perfect, because I know once I stretch the head, it's gonna, it's gonna mess up that tuning a little bit anyway. So do the pushing thing, tune the head back up again to where it sounds good, and now it's good to be very, very careful with the way you tune it. Obviously with tuning, I won't really cover so much basic stuff in this video. There's a ton of videos about that and probably stuff that you already know, but do the cross pattern tuning thing and just be very meticulous about all the tension rods sounding as close to the same as you can. So now in step 6, you should have your batter head sounding great, and now is the right time to actually measure what that pitch is. Again, I'm not aiming for a specific pitch as I'm tuning the drum. I tune it until it just sounds the way I want it to sound. Then afterwards, I'll check the pitch. The way I do this, I just do it very DIY way, which is essentially I take my phone, I go into Google, I search digital piano or like online digital piano, take the first online piano that I can find and just push the keys and tap the drum and listen until I can find which note on the piano corresponds to the tuning I've got on my tom, roughly. Sometimes it's not a perfect, A or something. It might be somewhere in between an A and A sharp or whatever. But that's totally fine as long as the drum itself sounds good. Just check the approximate pitch because you're going to need that when you're actually getting to tuning the resonant side. And now for step 7, we're gonna start actually dealing with the resonant side. So we'll do the exact same thing as we did with the batter head. Flip the drum around, make sure the bearing edge is nice and clear from any dust or anything. Put the old or new head back on. Put the hoop on and the tension rods and make sure that you get it finger tight the exact same way as before. Again, doesn't matter if it's just until the tension rods are touching the hoop or if it's as tight as you can. Doesn't matter as long as you do the same for every lug. And then for step 8, tune the resonant head up. And here, if you're using the same head that you had on before, you won't need to stretch it out like that. But if you are using a new head, I suggest again that you do the stretching just to make sure it stays in tune. So when you actually get to tuning the resonant head, what you want to aim for here is to get that specific interval between the resonant head and the batter head that you already checked the pitch on. So again, in my case, I like to go for the minor third, at least I did this time. Again, I do experiment a fair bit with this, but this time I went for minor third interval on all of my drums, and I just love how that sounds. So what that means is 3 semitones higher than my rack tom, the batter head, for example. So let's take my rack tom, for example. The batter head, I tuned to a D, and again, I tuned it first and then check the pitch, and it turned out it was a D. So what I do once I do the resonant side is I tune that 3 semitones higher. So that's going to be a D to D sharp, E, and then an F, right? So I'm going to tune the resonant side to an F. And here, again, make sure all the tension rods are tuned exactly the same. You want to be very careful with the tuning here. And then after that, your drum should sound pretty great. And now we get to the fun part, which is step 9. Just play the drums for a bit, especially if you're using heads that you haven't used before, which was the case for me. I'm using Evans UV1s right now, right? And before I was using G2 clears, and that's a big difference in just the sound of those heads. These are single ply coated heads, and before I was using double ply clear heads. That's a pretty massive difference, especially since the G2 clears had been on for such a long time. They were pretty much dead sounding. So this amount of tone is just kind of overwhelming almost in the beginning compared to what it was before. So take some time, just play the drums, get used to how they sound, and that will also prepare you for step 10, which is making adjustments. So even if you spent maybe a lot of time working on that rack tom and it sounded great on its own, once you hear it with the rest of the kit, maybe it doesn't blend or maybe it doesn't sound right once you actually mount it up. Holding a drum in your lap and putting it on a mount or on floor tom legs will change how it sounds. So it's very much worth taking some time to make adjustments. I had to, adjust for some overtones that were getting in the way and just adjust. I think I adjusted the pitch on pretty much all of the drums ever so slightly just to get them to blend together a little bit better. So that would essentially be my 10 steps to tuning great sounding toms. There are a couple of bonus tips I want to give you guys. So let's dive into those. Bonus tip number 1 is to tune the highest and the lowest point of the kit first. And it doesn't matter if you start with the 10-inch tom or the 16-inch floor tom or whatever, which one of those two you start with, as long as you start with one of them and then do the other. So in my case, I started with the 10-inch tom and then the 16-inch floor tom, and then finally I did the 14-inch floor tom. The reason for this is as I tune, I want to make sure I get the highest and the lowest point of the spectrum, and then whatever amount of toms I have in between, I'll fit that in with a nice pitch interval related to the highest and lowest point. If you do it, let's say you don't do it that way, you start with the you start with the lowest tom and then go upwards, what you might notice is maybe you started too high on this tom, and as you do the rest of the other ones, once you get to the smallest tom, that's going to be way too high in pitch, just because, it might be nice relative to the others, but just the whole kit is going to be tuned up too high. That's why I like to start with the highest and the lowest point. It just sets the boundaries for me, and then whatever amount of toms I have in between, I'll tune those to fit the pitch interval perfectly. Bonus tip number 2 is to check for snare buzz as you're playing the toms. Usually that's a problem with for example, 10-inch rack toms really sometimes activate the snare, so as you hit it, the snare just goes zzz like crazy. Sometimes the other drums can do that well, but usually the 10-inch is the one that causes that the most for me. So the way to fix that is, first of all, I would say just mess a bit with the wire the tension of the snare wires and how tight they are or how loose they are. Sometimes that alone can fix the problem, but sometimes you might need to adjust the tuning, either the tuning of your snare drum or the tuning of your toms. And so if you have to change the tuning on the rack tom, maybe you'll have to go back and adjust the other toms as well. But you know, it just depends on how much buzz you're having and if it's a big problem or not. But either way, the tip is to take time and make sure you get that right, because that can, especially if you record, that can really become, you know, something that just gets in the way pretty badly if there's a lot of it. So take the time to make sure you fix that. And the final bonus tip is to put cotton in your floor toms. So this is something I get a lot of questions about, especially when using clear heads and you can see the cotton bouncing around on the inside. It's like, what is that and why do I do it? And this is not, just a full disclaimer, this is not something I came up with. I actually heard about Benny Greb doing this. I believe this is something he does a lot. And I just wanted to try it for myself like a few years back, and it actually really works well. The reason you would do this is if you have a lot of like sympathetic ring in your floor toms, like you play your bass drum and your floor toms just go, oh, like they go crazy, like the sympathetic ring from the resonant head. Or if it's just too long of a sustain. When you hit the drum, it's just going, the sustain is just out of hand and it's not something you want to have to deal with. So what the cotton does is it acts kind of like a natural gate in terms of what what a gate is in mixing. So think of it this way: when I hit the floor tom, I usually do this, like right now I only have it in my 16-inch floor tom, I don't have it in my 14, but sometimes I'll do both. You can do it on the drums as well if needed. But when I hit the 16-inch floor tom here, what's going to happen is the cotton that's resting against the resonant side, once I hit the drum, that's going to jump up, so just from the vibration, so at the moment of impact. So when I hit the drum, it sounds like normal. The cotton doesn't really get in the way. And then immediately the cotton lands on the resonant head, controlling and dampening the overtones and the sustain. So it'll just give you a bit of a shorter sustain and a more focused, tight sound. And since the cotton will always be resting against the resonant head when you're not playing the drum, when you're playing, for example, the bass drum, that won't be a problem with the sympathetic ring, because the cotton is there and actively dampening the resonant side. So it's like an interactive kind of dampening method that adjusts to when or how you play the drum, which is really, really nice, and it actually makes a huge difference. So I pretty much always do that in my 16-inch floor tom, sometimes in the other drums as well. But again, the purpose is to eliminate sympathetic ring and too long or sustain or overtones and stuff like that you might not want from your resonant head. So that will be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I encourage you to try this tuning method. Hopefully it will work out well for you as well as it does for me. And do let me know if you guys want to see a video about tuning bass drum and tuning snare as well, or if there's anything in particular you would like to see in that video, or maybe a recommendation for a type of format you want me to do or something. Any questions about the way that I tune or anything like that as well, just let me know in the comments and I will make sure to reply to those. So I will see you guys soon with some more videos, and I will also now at the end screen, I will list the exact tunings that I did on my drums, so the exact pitches I tuned them to, just in case you guys might want to try tuning the exact same way that I do. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you soon. Take care.